President Trump's surprise strikes on Iran's nuclear sites are now sending shockwaves across the globe, with leaders weighing out the fallout from rising oil prices to fears that Iran could now shut the Strait of Hormuz. The world is bracing for what comes next. For more, we're joined by Professor Tim Harcourt from UTS. Great to see you. Obviously, so much going on at the moment. Talk to us about the strategic goal of the US strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities.
Well, basically, Iran's been waging war on Israel for 40 years, but using proxies. And the issue has been, to what extent could Iran get access to nuclear weapons and be able to attack Israel and eventually the West and the US. So by taking their capability out, that just removes that threat and in a sense weakens Iran and strengthens not just the US and Israel, but it actually strengthens the Saudis and some of the moderate Middle Eastern powers who have, of course, been fighting Iran themselves.
Could Iran realistically block the Strait of Hormuz, and what would that mean for oil markets?
Well, it's possible. I mean, they've been using the Houthis to attack ships and block different supply routes. In some ways, that's a threat, but in other ways, that could harm Iran and could harm a lot of its trading partners. And I don't know whether Russia would be too keen on Iran taking that action. And Iran and Russia are talking at the moment, so they could, but to what extent it's to their advantage? That's an open question.
Obviously, Iran has a couple of friends, China and Russia, not necessarily closely aligned to the thinking of the United States at the moment. This is a Pandora's box, Russia says. What are your views on that?
Yeah, well, Russia was out there saying what a violation of international law the US has been defined by taking out the nuclear capability of Iran, but I mean, what's Russia been doing in Ukraine with respect to international law, which it didn't seem too worried about then? So, I mean, I imagine China will keep out of this as much as possible, and Russia's got its own issues with Ukraine, and so they're not going to want to reallocate too many resources to supporting Iran, given the issue they've got on its own doorstep with Ukraine.
And we've heard, obviously, from Istanbul, which is an interesting place to do it, but from Iran's foreign minister, there he is there, talking about negotiation is over and essentially saying that the US has committed a crime here. What are your views on Iran's response? Because the US is trying to say we aren't at war. This was a calculated attack on 3 nuclear sites. No one was killed. This wasn't a target on soldiers. This was a target on their nuclear capabilities. It's done and dusted. This isn't going to carry on. What are your views?
Well, the question is, Aaron, to what extent the Iran regime can survive. It's under a lot of economic pressure, and it's under a lot of pressure from its own people who obviously don't want them there. And so what this has done is basically, defanged their nuclear capability. So their capacity to threaten the US and Israel and the West and other neighbours is now completely been obliterated. So their power externally weakens them, and that weakens them internally as well. And what the US has said is they're not looking for regime change. They just wanted to remove the nuclear threat, which they've done. Now, the question of regime change is really a matter for the Iranian people.
Yes, and as we know, with regime change in the Middle East, doesn't always work out, even when it's done by the people. If you look at the Arab Spring, the reality of that was it didn't quite fix many of the issues in the Middle East. You think about Russia's perspective on all of this, and I take what you say about they've got their own issues in Ukraine there, but they've lost Bashar al-Assad in Syria. What would Russia's viewpoint be if they lose Iran as well?
That's a big question. I mean, it was interesting the role they've played with Syria and, for that matter, Turkey. In some ways, Russia has played both sides of the fence in some of these nations, and it hasn't always ended up well for them. And we saw what happened to them, of course, in Afghanistan historically. So for Russia, there's some very difficult calculations to make for them, and to what extent do they want to, risk their own regime, propping up one that's ailing in Iran.
You talk about the US not wanting regime change, and they've made that pretty significant point. But Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, I wonder what his viewpoint is, because he, bit by bit, has been taking on Iran's proxies, but sitting at the very top of the octopus is the Ayatollah. Do you think that in the end, Israel would like to see a change of leadership in Iran?
Oh, I think there's no doubt about that from an Israeli point of view. I mean, the relationship between the Persian people and the Jewish people is traditionally, as you know, very strong. And Israel had a good relationship, with the Persian royal family. So they obviously would prefer that. And also, I think the Saudis would prefer that, because it would be much easier for Saudi Arabia to operate in the region with a very different regime in Iran than the Ayatollahs, and that would sort of solve a couple of problems at once, but most of all, obviously, for the Iranian people who've had to live under this oppressive regime for 40 years.
Very much so. Obviously, we'll be watching those oil prices as well to see how the hedging helps, if it actually works. But always appreciate your time after a very big weekend. We'll talk to you again soon. Professor Tim Harcourt, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.